Testing.
Ladies and gentlemen, could I please have your attention? Even for those still signing in, would you please do that quietly while we proceed with the briefing? It's my pleasure to welcome you here this morning. I thank you very much for attending and doing so promptly. The briefings will get underway very shortly. And apart from all of the welcoming messages, I do want to pass on to you expressions from Mr. Patrick Botellier, General Manager of Rolex Australia. He asked us to remember that Rolex is proud to be a part of the 73rd edition of the Rolex Sydney to Hobart Yacht Race, and he wishes all skippers and crew a safe trip to Hobart. He apologises for not being able to make it here from Melbourne this morning. We'll have briefings this morning from Jane Golding, the Manager of the New South Wales Weather Services from the Bureau of Meteorology. I'll shortly after that introduce someone from AMSA, Les Parducci, and Drew Jones from the RMS, and of course our Race Committee Chair, Tim Cox, to complete the briefing, followed by Biddy Badnack representing the RYCT. I'll proceed quickly so we have a lot to go through. I do want to acknowledge the work, particularly of the BOM and AMSA and RMS in setting up their supports for our event, and Jane particularly for the wee hours of the morning going through all of the briefing notes to make sure the weather modelling is correct. Would you please welcome Jane Golding?
I'll just check everyone at the back can hear me okay? Okay. So I'm just going to go through a few safety pointers for where to find the Bureau's forecasts and warnings and what some of the terminology means. And then I'll get on to the race forecast as the guidance is suggesting at the moment. So a few vital checks, obviously, that I'm sure you all know about before you get out on the water. Check your warnings, your weather, your wind, your wave and your tides. And all of that information is available on the Bureau's website. Through where the arrow is down the bottom, there's a marine and ocean portal where another screen will pop up on the right and you can access your forecast winds from models, also the text forecasts, the official policy and your tides, currents and all the other relevant forecast information you might need for out in the water. There's also other ways to get the forecasts, so through MRSAT, through HF and VHF radio, so the forecasts in the mornings will get read out regularly. And also the Bureau's got a light web page set up specifically for mariners with it's got a easier download. All the forecasts are in text, so it's set up for mariners. So some of the relevant forecasts and warnings for this race that you'd need to keep an eye on are the coastal waters forecasts and warnings, the high seas forecasts and warnings, and also probably before you go, some of the graphical output. So the relevant coastlines for the race. They start in the Sydney closed waters forecast, and then as you move down the coast, this is how the Bureau segments their forecasts. You move into the Illawarra coastal waters, the Batemans coastal waters, Eden, and then as you move into Victorian waters, the East Gippsland coast, and then Tassie, east of Flinders Island, have a coastal waters forecast district, the upper east coast, the lower east coast, and as you head in towards the Derwent, the southeast coast. This is an example of what a coastal waters forecast looks like, and this is this morning's forecast, so it doesn't, I didn't put the 26 on there. I'll go through that in a minute. But there's a link at the top to where you can get your warnings issued twice a day around 4 o'clock in the morning and 4 to 5 in the afternoon, updated more regularly if there's significant changes to what the forecast is. And then wind, seas, swell information on it as well as the weather. If there are warnings out, we have a separate product that goes out, which is really just a pointer to, or just to highlight that there are conditions out there that could be dangerous. That gets read out on the radio, the marine wind warning summary, but it's really just a pointer to the relevant coastal waters forecasts. And all the detail is contained within the coastal waters forecast. The other one, depending on how far offshore you're going, so the coastal waters are out to 60 nautical miles off the coast. The high seas forecast, the relevant one is the southeastern area. The information in that's pretty broad though. And that's an example of the high seas forecast. The other way to get forecast information through the Bureau's website is through Medeye. So all of the so the text forecasts summarise what these graphics say. The forecasters in the New South Wales, Victorian and Tassie forecasting centres will assess all of the guidance, pick the one most likely to be picking the current situation, forecast situation, and issue those grids through Medeye. So you can get wind forecasts, weather and waves. This is an example of your total wave height forecast. So just quickly before I move on to what we're forecasting from the 26th to the 30th, I'll just go through a bit of the terminology for how we phrase the coastal waters forecast. So we forecast the mean wind strength, which is based on your 10-minute average of the wind measured 10 metres above the surface. So over the waters, that's pretty close to what you'll see most of the time, closer to the surface. And the direction for winds is the direction the wind is coming from. So a northeasterly, it's coming from that northeastern sector, heading to the southeast. The wind gusts are not, we're not forecasting the wind gusts, so there'll be gusts above what we're forecasting. That's just the way the wind works. And the gusts are typically, you know, on average around about, you can expect on average around about 40% stronger at times from the forecast that we're issuing, but those gusts are typically short-lived. And if you get thunderstorms, of course, there are no thunderstorms forecast for the first few days of this race, but in thunderstorms, the gusts will be significantly higher than that. The seas, looks like for this race, most of the seas will be wind-driven, so that's shorter period waves. We also give information on the swell, which is generated by more distant weather conditions and not necessarily locally coming from the direction that the wind is blowing where you are. So we also forecasting the average conditions. So, you know, if the maximum waves can be twice what we're forecasting, but typically the average will be around about what's on the forecast. So we issue strong wind warnings, or we issue warnings once the wind gets above strong wind strength, and strong wind strength kicks in at 25 knots. So over this race, it's likely there will be a couple of strong wind warnings, depending on where you are in the northeasterlies. We're not looking we're not looking at gale force winds on this race at all. But you know, for whatever reason you're getting in particularly late, there is a system around the 30th, 31st to keep an eye on in the westerlies. But the warning to be looking out for most of this race is a strong wind warning. So 25 knots to 33 knots, that's that range, and the typical waves with those wind-driven waves are 3 to 5 metres. Okay, I'll move on to the race forecast. So what I've got up here at the moment is the 5 a.m. mean sea level pressure on the left, and the satellite image from the same time on the other side. So you can see the dominant feature will be, for New South Wales for this race, will be a high sitting in the Tasman Sea. What we're expecting to happen today is a gusty southerly. This front to move up the coast comes through Sydney during the afternoon period, but that moves off pretty quickly. The high becomes established and we go back into a northeasterly stream for most of the race. Also of note on this chart is a series of really, well, they're actually quite weak fronts and troughs over in the belt of westerlies over Tassie. So the strength of those is quite tricky to forecast around Tasmania, but we are expecting one of those to come through on the 28th into the Hobart area. So this is just as we move through time. So today, the top two panels, you can see that front's up on the Hunter Coast by 10 o'clock tonight, and then tomorrow this high starts to come up behind it. So should be in southeasterlies tomorrow, but by the next day you can see that high is become established out in the Tasman, and we should start to move to more of a northerly flow by late on the 26th or through the 27th. That's just broadly speaking. For the race start time, at the moment it doesn't look like it'll have turned around to a northeasterly by then, and most likely it'll be in the 5 to 10 knot range inside the harbour and a little bit stronger outside the heads. So I've got the scale for the wind strengths on the bottom of all of these graphics I'm about to put up. 15 knots is in this orange-ish colour, and you'll see in a minute when I go further that most of the race is covered by at least orange. So other things to note is high tides, 2:32, so after the race start. Weather, not expecting any significant weather. There's a bit of cloud around, maybe a light drop or two, but probably pretty nice conditions to watch the start of the race. And that's the forecast for Sydney. So 26, mostly cloudy, slight chance of a shower, and getting up to around 24 in the city. So by 5 o'clock on the 26th, we are expecting the winds to be somewhere in the 10 to 15 knot range between Sydney and as you move down the south towards the south coast. There's a background southerly swell probably still hanging around from that front that comes through today, but otherwise it's not particularly high, and no significant weather. And then, as you can see, by midnight, the winds are starting to pick up, and those strong winds will continue through for the next 24 hours, particularly if you're down in this area here. They could be a little bit stronger than that in Bass Strait, so just to keep an eye on that. There may be a strong wind warning out for eastern Bass Strait for those northeasterly winds on the Wednesday. There's not too much change during Wednesday. Still northeasterlies, maybe backed a little bit more around to the northeast, and picking up a bit further during the course of Wednesday, and that's as a weak front approaches Tassie. So that weak front will come through. The timing, the main front slips to the south, but there looks like there's a really weak prefrontal trough that comes up, and the timing of that is around about at this stage. It's kind of late morning on the 28th, for the Hobart area. So northwesterlies in the overnight period up until Thursday morning, probably really dropping out down that way, and then around midday it doesn't look more than 10 to 15 knots, or might reach 20 knots at times, that southerly change, as it moves up the Tasmanian coast. So by midnight it's sitting somewhere up on the northern tip. That's what the guidance is suggesting at the moment. There's not really any significant weather with that front. It's pretty weak. The air mass is pretty dry. And then by the next day, there's a bit of divergence, but I guess the general theme is should probably swing back around to a northeasterly for most of Friday. And then on Saturday, we have a more significant westerly change, more significant front coming through on the Saturday. So just before I go to a summary, the currents are pretty light for most of the race. Looks like there's a good eddy sitting off Bateman's Bay, but kind of once you get to the south of that, there's very light, very weak currents. And Hobart's forecast for Thursday, possible shower, 0 to 1 millimetre, so if you get a shower it seems like it'll be pretty light, but some more significant rain coming through on the Friday ahead of that front that's on the leading edge of that front that moves through on Saturday. As a summary, start of the race, easterly 10 knots, probably a bit under, backing to the northeast and increasing slowly during Tuesday as you head down the coast. Wednesday, 15 to 25 knots for most of Wednesday, also depending on where you are, probably most of Thursday. What I didn't mention on Thursday is there's also a very weak westerly change. It's a very transient feature, but it looks like it'll move through Bass Strait during the middle of the day. And Tassie, a southwest-southeast change, reaching Storm Bay late morning. And then Friday, rain in Hobart anyhow, and eastern Tassie. And that's it for the brief from me. We'll update it in a couple of days' time.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'll agree we enjoy enormous support from government agencies, especially with what was just presented for us by Jane. We also have support again from AMSA. And without further ado, would you please join me in welcoming Les Parducci, please.
Good morning, everybody. I'll just do a quick safety brief in regards to mainly concentrate on EPIRB activations and PLBs. Sorry. Good morning, everybody, again. From AMSA, the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, I'll do a quick brief in regards to EPIRB and PLB activation, medical emergency, and general safety. Without any delay, if you are required to activate your beacon, make sure that it's turned on correctly and do not hold to it. It has a lanyard that can be so that you can drop it in the water. The antenna needs to be upright and needs to be in visibility of the sky. If it's in a life raft because of weather conditions, please make sure that you keep it in a life raft and keep it upright. There are two types of beacons. One is manually activated and another one is water activated. Just manually activated with your hands and or drop in the water if it's a water activated one. If you're also carrying a PLB attached to your life vest, make sure that it's held upright and the antenna is clearly visible to the sky. Generally, when you're laying down, PLBs are not designed to stand upright by themselves, so make sure that it's up. That will guarantee a quicker activation and detection. If you use a beacon, it'll have an audible alarm that can be heard, and we'll have also strobe light to alert aircraft especially at night time, to see you, or you could have an LED light as well. Once the beacon is activated, it will transmit a signal to the satellite. The satellite would then relay the signal to the JRCC, which is the Joint Rescue Coordination Center, where it will be detected and we'll start conducting an operation. What's likely to occur is that we'll send an aircraft first. Our dedicated search and rescue aircraft at the bottom right one is a new Challenger, which will depart very likely from Melbourne. And then subsequently there will be an helicopter if available. From a surface perspective, it's likely that all other vessels will be alerted. The New South Wales Water Police will also have a vessel in the vicinity, and or the New South Wales Marine Rescue, and or any other assets that are in the area at the time. We'll broadcast as a distress broadcast, so expect to have any type of assets capable of recovering you. If a beacon is accidentally activated or inadvertent, please let us know. Turning the beacon off will not stop our response. We'll respond until we have guaranteed your safety. If not sinking, stay on board the yacht and assign somebody the responsibility of the beacon. Keep it on until you're told to turn it off. Use visual signals to attract attention. And if you have more than one beacon in real distress, please make sure that you turn every beacon available. For helicopter transfers in a general distress situation, you have to listen to VHF where you have some directions, and the pilot and or crew will start talking to you and make sure that the plan is perfectly understood by everybody. Make sure you stow all loose equipment and remove or flap or secure all sails, and be prepared from extremely strong winds from the rotor wash, noise and spray. If you can, start the engine and steer into the weather. Otherwise, you secure your anchor to the bow. Turn the radar to standby and do not use HF communications, they might disturb the navigation equipment. Be ready to launch a life raft if required to do so. During helicopter operations, because of the rigging of yachts, it's very likely that a life raft is required to be deployed to move away from the yacht and then be recovered by the swimmer in that way. If you have a medical assistance, JRCC, the Rescue Coordination Centre, can provide some medical assistance and evacuation if required with the assistance of a telemedical advice service. However, your REST directory also provide that service, and you can contact both. For your return voyage, that's when we generally have most of beacon activations. Make sure that if you change vessel or any details change for your POB, that you advise us through the REST directory. Have a safe race. I'll turn it off.
Ladies and gentlemen, we of course do enjoy a lot of support from RMS, not only in relation to this race, but for all of the activity the club manages inside these waters in the harbour. Drew Jones will be well known to you and is a great supporter of the club in the way that he interacts and has a great relationship with us. Would you please welcome Drew?
Good morning, everyone. I'll keep it pretty brief. I've only got 3 slides for you, one of them being the intro one. Most of you would have done it before, and there's not a lot of changes from previous years. Basically, the exclusion zone is going to be the same as previous years. We haven't changed anything at all. The dark grey area you can see and the orange is all of the special event area, which from 11:30 a.m. means that everything inside that area is a 6-knot no-wash area for all powered vessels. The exclusion zone is marked by about 200 buoys, and as competitors what we request is that once you move into that exclusion zone that you don't come out of it. The only way you go out is out through the northeast there. So what we find is that the spectators going up and down the outside will not be expecting a vessel to come out of the exclusion zone from the sides. So please make sure, once you go in, you stay in there. If you do need to get out for any reason, just make sure that you're not going into the traffic of the spectator boats going up and down the sides. If you do need to get back out to get back to the club for something's gone wrong with the boat, whatever, if you come out through the southern line of the exclusion zone, it'll work much better for us. And just let one of our guys know as you're coming past that you need to get out for a reason. Just some key timings as well. So from 11:30, 6 knots and no wash starts. From midday, the exclusion zone is activated. So non-competitor yachts have got to drop their sails. There'll be no anchoring in the orange area around the outside. And then we'll keep that clear for you until the 1 o'clock start. And that's it from me. Have a great race south. Cheers.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the important part having been dealt with by our authority friends, I'd like to hand over to Tim Cox, Race Committee Chairman, to take you through things.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My primary concern for this race is the safety of all competitors and to ensure that we have a fair and equitable race. So I'll go through safety. For those who I haven't met before, I've been doing this for a few years now, and my background has primarily been in the Navy since the early 60s. And I left the Navy in 2000, and 6 years I was responsible for operational standards and also safety in HMA fleet. So far as safety is concerned, it requires attention for everybody. It's a shared responsibility, which is significant, particularly for those who are in charge of vessels and skippers. You should note that the crew disclaimers include an obligation for the person in charge of the vessel to carry out a brief prior to the race start. This is a change from previous years. Attention to the storage and the function of all safety equipment such as life jackets, PLBs, flares, bilge pumps, emergency steerings, life jackets should be fitted and named is absolutely essential before leaving the dock here at the CYC or wherever you're coming from, please. Man overboard procedures need to be briefed and practiced before the start, and I strongly recommend that you recover a realistic man from the water because you'll find it is significantly more difficult than picking up a lifebuoy. You also need to make sure that the procedures are slick and that they've been properly practiced and everybody understands them, because recovery of a man at night is a very difficult exercise unless you have some very sophisticated equipment which you don't have. Remember that we've made some changes to the sailing instructions and we issued them last night, that at all times when the wind is forecast to be more than 25 knots, then you are required to wear your life jacket on deck at all times, and of course between sunset and sunrise it's been compulsory for a number of years, and I would remind you that PLBs should be carried on deck 24/7. I ask that no anchors be proud while racing, or particularly at the start. Charlie's Dream, I'd like yours removed before 11:30 this morning, please, from the bow of your boat. We need to talk about care of EPIRBs and PLBs. It's essential and important that everybody understands how they work and make sure that they look after them properly. We have 1,300 plus in this race of PLBs and EPIRBs, and unscheduled responses to carelessness is never appreciated, and if a helicopter flies for a mistake, then it's unpopular and it's also expensive. Sailing instructions contain a number of geographic positions and bearings. They are all approximate and they are not for navigation and they are not precise. But they are within the realms of the accuracy of the GPS system. So for the pre-start, we'd ask that you check in with Shellbank, the Middle Harbour starting boat, which will be on the middle line, as early as practicable, with your storm source flying and your storm jib, or with 50% mainsail reefed. Now I know there's some contention about this. There is a member of the race committee who will be on board Shellbank to judge whether the 50% is achieved, His judgment is not challengeable, nor is it protestable. There are 3 start lines, and they require good manners and seamanship. I ask that you stay behind your line at the 5 minutes to the start, and between your line and the one south of you. And for the southern line, you can go back as far as you can without going onto the rocks, of course. A collision in the pre-start phase or when exiting the harbour will ruin your day. Also, if you choose to ground, you'll find it's equally unrewarding. Check in with JBW before the start on the race frequency is an option that is available to all. The start, individual recalls will be on channel 72 within approximately 5 minutes of the start in accordance with sailing instructions 17. Keep out of the spectator fleet is in accordance with sailing instruction 18. Patience and manners and consideration of others, please, while leaving the harbour. We have had a couple of collisions in previous years, and if you only make it to Watson's Bay and have to come back to the CYC, it's generally speaking not a rewarding day. Remember that some of the spectators are driven by people, spectator boats are driven by people who might be not on their best on Boxing Day, so you need to be cautious of them also. Press representatives will be disembarking from both Comanche and Wild Oats 11 when those 2 yachts are clear of the harbour. As usual, the 2 press gentlemen will jump into the water and may be recovered by a rib if they're lucky. Please also note that we have moved the marked Victor and X-ray so that X-ray is not shrouded by the exclusion zone. So let's move to radio communications. This year we have JBW as the radio relay vessel. We're also fortunate to have the sailing ship Young Endeavour going down with us as well as a backup. So we've got really good communications, so there should be no difficulties for anybody. Pass mark, as always, is 100%. The skeds, and I'll start with the first one of the day, which is at 17:05 on the day of the start, and the start will be at 1300 unless the Weather Bureau have told me fibs. And then 0:05 and 7:35, and it continues throughout. A listing sked is at 12:05, and they are all on the simplex frequency 4483. And we will use, if we have to do any SAR work and we're going to use Young Endeavour, then we'll switch to 6516 and we will control that from Hobart. Green Cape reporting to JBW is compulsory for all yachts on the race frequency 4483. A failure to meet the Green Cape requirements will result in a did not finish. So please make sure you get that right. There is an option of calling Hobart Race Control on 4483, and they are the only 2 options that are available. Additional reports are required, please, as you have Tasman Island bearing 000 and on entering the Derwent on VHF. If you're in the Derwent and a sked comes up, I'm at peace if you miss the sked. Sat phones are important to allow communications in the event of an accidental PLB or EPIRB transmission, so they need to be switched on and checked for message on a regular basis. AIS is an aid to safety. Many of you like to turn it off. I recommend that you leave it on. It may, in fact, save you in a difficult situation. Channel 16 throughout is to be monitored by all vessels, particularly on the approaches to ports on the east coast, and I refer there, if you go close to Port Kembla or Botany Bay, please put channel 16 on, because the authorities there are not the most friendly and they like yachts on that. Yellow Brick trackers work well. Please leave them alone and they'll be quite good, and your families like to know where you are. The finishing line is noted in the sailing instructions between the flag mast on the finishing box on Battery Point and the Rolex position and the Rolex buoy, and the position in the sailing instructions is again approximate. Illuminate sail numbers at night, please. Declarations are required in accordance with sailing instruction 26, and it's done by email, and you must receive an email confirmation that it's done. There were 3 yachts that had difficulty last year, resulted in a penalty having to be imposed, and that was after a couple of telephone calls. But please make sure you get your declarations correct. Facilities are available to assist you at the liaison centre on the dock if you can't send it from on board. They are to be logged within 6 hours of your finish time. Protests need to be logged within 6 hours. You'll notice that the IJs, led by John Roundtree from New Zealand, a ruthless and harsh team at the back of the room. If you wish to have protests, I strongly recommend against it. Retirements, I'm responsible, or the race committee are responsible for ringing your next of kin if you have to retire. So if you do retire, I'd like to know what's wrong. I'd like to know if anyone has been injured, because if I ring your next of kin and play the Goldfish song, they're not terribly impressed. And remember, if you do retire, please stay on the skids until you get into port. And once you arrive in port, I would appreciate a telephone call to me or the race control once you've arrived, preferably before you venture to the local refreshment centre. And also remember that I've got to put on the website the reason that you retire. So I'd be grateful if you gave me a succinct reason for retirement. And if you put up seasick, then okay, I put up seasick. Once it's up, I don't take it down. There have been some questions about the course that's set out in the sailing instructions. It's fairly simple. The positions that are in the sailing instructions for where the obstacles are approximate, particularly south of Tasmania, in the southern areas south of Tasman Island. The Naval Hydrographic Service does not visit the Tasman Islands on a regular basis, so there are some inaccuracies, and I strongly recommend that if you want to go close inshore off the Tasmanian coast, you do it off the paper charts, because if you do it off the electronic ones, you might find something there that surprises you and ruins your day. The divisions and the start lines are on the notice board. There is also a notice about gambling and sailing in Australia. I draw your attention to that notice from Australian Sailing, and it's down below next to the start lines and the division groups. So the Clippers broadcast their own weather. They probably get it from the UK, so it'll be valuable. That broadcast is available to everybody in the race. So if you want it, it'll be on the notice board how you get it, and everyone can have it. It comes as grid files, and if you want an extra weather forecast, you're most welcome to it. So we now just move to this tethers. Stevie, can we find the slide? Right, so this is a slide of a recent incident that occurred in the Indian Ocean not long ago, and it doesn't matter which boat it was or what happened, but you can see here that the clip on the tether catches on a cleat as it's coming across the deck, and you get a lot of lateral pressure onto that fitting, and you'll notice on the next slide what happens to the hook on the tether. And if the hook on the tether does that, then you are over the side. So if you have these cleats, you need to take action to either rope them off so that some things can't catch on them, or get them changed before the race starts. They will do this if the wrong amount of lateral pressure is put on that tether. So I pass that as a warning to everybody to make sure that there's nothing that you can catch those tethers on. And finally, the race committee is here to help you. If you have a problem, miss a scad, or some issue, you can call me on my mobile at Hobart Race Control, or anybody in the race centre 24/7. I wish you a safe passage to Hobart and hope that you're all there before New Year's Eve, including my good friends from the Army who probably need to start a little early to make sure they get there. Thank you very much.
And from our race partner, or race finishing partner, RYCT, we have Biddy Badanack to give you some information regarding the marshalling at the end of the race.
Thanks very much, John. Just a few perennials. You're sick of hearing my voice up here, but there's the old perennial, berthing. You've been allocated a berth. Would you please accept the direction of the patrol boat and go to that berth? There may be a delay if you've got a berth in Constitution Dock. We have to get the watchman down to open the bridge. And if that occurs, no doubt you'll be given your case of beer to keep you calm and collected. Also, with the case of beer, if you could, you'll get a case of beer and you need to swap the tracker. Hand the tracker to the volunteer who delivers that berth. Fuelling, Tasports in their wisdom or otherwise have decreed that there was to be no refuelling at Kings Wharf Marina or Constitution Dock. That includes jerry canned. The Yacht Club has a 24-hour fuelling berth now, which will take yachts and the depth of water there is 3 metres. Prize giving, that's on the 31st of December at the Grand Chancellor. If you do succeed in winning a trophy or a prize, would you please, if you can't be there personally, could you arrange for somebody to attend on your behalf? The baggage is 24 hours and it's in the usual place behind the City Hall. The liaison centre is in the Rolex Village. The crew shirts will be handed out in the Rolex Village. That's about all from me, and I wish you all a very happy Christmas and a very safe journey to Hobart, and I look forward to seeing you when you arrive. Thank you.
So just bringing this session to a close, I need to ask certain representatives from about 7 boats to complete their paperwork by 11 o'clock. I'll read these names out. Climate Action Now, CVS Invictus Games Down Under, Daredevil, Mondo, Pier Whatever, Solano, I beg your pardon, and Weddell. Please make sure your paperwork's complete. It's absolutely vital. The other connection with paperwork is if you are representing a yacht here today, you are aware that it's a requirement that we have signatories at on the paperwork to ensure that you've verified your attendance. It's a part of the instructions, so please don't let yourselves down by not doing that. Outside of that, I'd like to thank again those involved in the Race Committee and the Sailing Administration Office. I'd like to thank you all as competitors for your courtesy, for everyone involved, including the volunteers. I wish you well for Christmas, and I will look forward to seeing you on Boxing Day. Thanks very much.